Street Fighter 6 has 2 new high-profile developers working on it, and we explore what they're going to bring to the table. There's also plenty of old-school developers working on this game as well at Capcom, so how will those two sides mix? We explore what fans should expect from the newest game and more on this episode of EventHubs Talk and Block. Before we get started here, if people can psycho crush the like button, it actually helps us out just a ton, and we really super appreciate it. And let us do a little bit more here in the future. We're doing some nice stuff already, but we're gonna do a little bit more. But John, I want to talk about 5
Cammy.
No. 5 big things. Cammy could be one of them, but 5 big things people should expect from Street Fighter 6, not including Cammy, actually. So we have a mix of new and old blood working on Street Fighter 6, and I want to talk about what fans should expect from the new game based on what we're seeing and hearing out there. First off, I want to introduce the new guys, Yusuke Hashimoto and Kazuhiro Tsuchiya. And I'm probably botching the pronunciations on that a little bit. I will get better at those. My apologies. But Yusuke was the director of Bayonetta 2, and that is one of the most heralded games of all time. But he also previously worked on Capcom titles like Street Fighter Alpha 3, Resident Evil 4. You remember that one, John? You remember RE4?
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah. And then Devil May Cry. This guy is a top-tier talent. He was the director of Bayonetta 2, one of the best games ever. And he also did some work on Smash Ultimate. His resume is extremely high-end, and he's going to be serving as a planner and game designer on this new game. And then Kazuhiro Tsuchiya served as a producer on Mega Man 11, which at Capcom is actually a very important title. Producer, depending on where you go, can be kind of whatever. But Yoshinori Ono held the title of producer for Street Fighter 4, and then Ryoto Netsuma held the title of producer for Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. So if you get a producer title, it is a big deal at Capcom. So now the stage is set. It's not just the new guys, it is the old blood as well. Let's cover these things that I think are going to be a big deal in this game.
Is Washige there?
What's that?
Is Washige there?
Washiga is the battle planner. Yeah, he is.
Great.
He's very
I'm
high
excited.
up on the list. Yeah, so
Cool.
So Street Fighter 6, number one here. Street Fighter 6 is likely going to be a faster-paced game. Bayonetta 2 and Mega Man 11 keep things moving pretty quickly. These games have a brisk pace that they move at, and it's more than likely that we're going to see the speed of Street Fighter 5 as opposed to something like the speed of Street Fighter 3, which was a much slower-paced game. Street Fighter 5 can go quickly, probably a little too quickly. And I personally wouldn't mind if the next game is a tad bit slower. But again, like I just mentioned, the Bayonetta 2, Mega Man 11, they have a high-paced movement options and a lot of button presses and other stuff you're just kind of expected to do. And that is a big part of the appeal, the fun of those games. I can't see Capcom going, like, let's dial things down. Let's make them slower. How do you take to that, John? Like, do you think that's something they're going to aim at?
Yeah, I think that when you think of, okay, for every mile of road, there's 2 miles of ditch, right? You go too far this way and it sucks, and you go too far that way and it sucks. They probably have Street Fighter Cross Tekken still pretty fresh in their minds in terms of, like, that was way too slow paced when it came out, and that led in no small way to the demise of that game, unfortunately. And I will add for all of you guys that still really, really love it and want to talk about it. I'm down for a reasonably fast-paced game. The thing is, can you finagle in there the fundamentals and like the things that make the game significant, the meaningful interactions, or does it just become V-trigger, blah, 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 what happened,
Yes.
Because, and that's why I'm so, well, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I'm a little bit worried. But I'm not going to make too big of a judgment before we get in there because, like, yes, it could be a very fast-paced, quick game and still have all those things, and then, like, maybe that still captures the essence and the spirit of Street Fighter that we're hoping for. So no major judgments, but a little bit of trepidation.
It's good to be fearful, especially initially on, and it's oftentimes that these game mechanics, Ultras in Street Fighter 4, V-triggers in Street Fighter 5, they end up being too dominant initially, and they're what the entire game is based around usually, and it's like, okay, the developers really want people using these tools. They really want them going in, and then they just end up being like just too all-encompassing. And then, a year after the game's out, they see it dialed back. I really expect a very similar thing here from Street Fighter 6. But that point is very well taken. Yeah. So
Yeah, and again, if Luke is an indicator of how the pacing of things will go, most of his moves move him forward. They usher him toward the fight, and that does make either he's going to hit or maybe he's going to open himself up to be hit. I would like to see what that looks like in a game where there's more Lukes, and I don't mean like exact mirror matches. I mean where Ryu's moves do the same thing to a degree, or that other characters have that similar kind of status and have that similar kind of flow to their gameplay. What does that look like? And again, we kind of see it in Luke mirrors, but I don't think that's there needs to be the other different characters that do that kind of a thing too. But that is interesting to me. I think that could be really cool.
So at number 2, don't expect Capcom to reinvent the wheel. Neither Bayonetta 2 or Mega Man 11 were considered huge departures from their previous games, and Street Fighter 6 should be no exception. Actually, throughout most of Street Fighter's lifespan, we haven't seen a big departure from prior games. The last time Capcom actually did a major revision to the gameplay was Street Fighter 3, and once again, was not super well received. Expect similar treatment here with the tried and true gameplay aspects that fans love returning. While Capcom could heavily reinvent things, they tend to do better if they're going to do that with like a brand new IP, not existing franchises and stuff where fans have such heavy expectations. So Street Fighter 6 will likely bring back the tried and true fireball uppercut strategies that you've been doing since Street Fighter 2. And I think it's something they really messed up with Street Fighter 5. It's like that you can't do the fireball uppercut stuff with Ryu that well. Like it's this patch is it's that stuff is just kind of fans expect. It's like jumping on someone's head with Mario, kind of thing. There's just certain things fans expect, and I really think that they're going to bring back a lot of the core stuff that actually Street Fighter 5 went away from.
Yeah, that's interesting to kind of like follow the trail there of like, well, why doesn't that work with a character like Ryu in this game? And I think the big reason there is it might be multifaceted, but the fact that zoning is not as effective in this game. There's so many ways around zoning. So you take away that element of the fireballs. Well, if Ryu can't throw as many fireballs, then he can't work the jab to open up something else, right, so to speak. So he's not going to get as many DPs because you're not going to be as coaxed into or coerced into jumping as much, right? And so if the mechanics ripple that way, they can indirectly, feed into the process that, and then later on down the river or something, that's where you see stuff dam up or change. But it's like how do you predict that? I mean, you can see it to an extent, but especially when you're rolling out an entire new game and such, it's like what's going to happen. And that's why I think we see so much problem, if you even want to call it that, with vanilla versions of games, right? Because it's like, well, this is our big main first trial test run, so a little bit of patience there, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a river, and if you're living in a van down by the river, you can expect plenty of nuance and depth in your games, and that is number 3. One of the things that the main entries for the Street Fighter series have generally been received at is high praise for their depth. Street Fighter 3 was actually initially thought to be a very boring game, but it actually picked up steam as time went on, and with Third Strike and other things, and many people felt that was like the grandmaster highest level of Street Fighter that has ever been done. But it took people a while to wrap their heads around that depth, that nuance, that understanding of, hey, that is there, right? Hashimoto and Tsuchiya, they are well known for their gameplay depth they provide in their titles that they've worked on, and I would fully expect the nuances and the depth to be there for Street Fighter 6. But I also fully expect the veterans in the fighting game community to say that the game initially sucks and is hella scrub friendly, because that's also the tradition, and we have to keep tradition alive.
Yeah, absolutely. That we'll see it. We'll say it ourselves, I'm sure, at least the parts of us that are reacting and that have an expectation, and that expectation isn't met. And some of that will be helpful and accurate. Some of it will be just, blowing off steam and misplaced. But yeah, that's the cycle every time. We're not going to break it this time for sure.
Yeah,
I've already got some tweets charged up, but I haven't even seen the game yet.
Got to put it out there. John, when was the last time Capcom did not deliver with the depth and nuance in their gameplay in a main Street Fighter entry? And I mean, even with 5, let's put 5 on there and say, did they fail to deliver there, or did that game have far more depth and understanding than people initially thought?
It got to a place where the depth and such became, Well, it's one thing to say, is the depth there? It's another thing to say, is there any reason for people to explore it, or should they just keep pressing roundhouse with so and so? You know, like early Nikali, just press the roundhouse because it's crush counter, it's got all these advantages, and you're in 8 frames of input lag, so you're not going to get whiff punished. And so it's like, well, I have no reason to explore it. You know, kind of cinch things up and alter in balance, and then finally it gets to a place where, yes, Street Fighter V, maybe it doesn't get explored in the same exact ways, but the depth comes in a different, you know, avenue of it's more in like the playmaking room than it is out on the field, something like that. So yeah, I think I agree with whatever you just said.
Number 4, combat and gameplay should be a heavy focus from the development team. Going back once again to Bayonetta 2 and Mega Man 11, they were generally very well praised for their tight and creative combat mechanics. And it's also something that was generally well thought of in Street Fighter V with the V system as the game aged and the developers were better able to tap into what they have. Now, that took a while to polish up, as just we talked about that. But going back again, Bayonetta 2 was actually chided by some in the community for not changing things up enough in regards to its combat compared to the previous game. And the majority of people were pretty much fine with that because the first game was really good and the second game just improved upon it. Like, why change something that was, you know, awesome to begin with when you just made it better? And Mega Man 11 can actually trace its roots all the way back to 1987 with fighting the Robot Masters, taking their power, doing it. It's the same thing we've been doing for a long time now, but just done in a different way, in a very special way, and it works quite well. I'm expecting the developers to really have a very heavy focus on the combat, the gameplay, because that is what we've seen from this, and actually not just, you know, oh yeah, you know, because everyone says they focus on that, making the game fun and other stuff like that. I actually expect this game to be very fun, kind of from the get-go, and actually based on one of the things that you said, I'm thinking they're going to implement something like this, like a whiff punish system, where you do the whiff punish and you get like extra meter or you get a sound effect, because something like the crush counter thing, right? And a very skill-based system that heavily rewards people and is very fun. That's why you bring in the producer of Mega Man 11. That's why you bring in the director of Bayonetta 2, to find that core gameplay thing that is just fun to do, and then you get all of your other developers in there to balance it and make it a very smart thing. That is what I'm counting on from this game, and with the talent behind it, I think we'll see that.
I think Washige is pushing for getting rid of round 3s in general. Just no more round 3s. No. So, like, how do you capture what that is with specifically fighting games, specifically Street Fighter, in terms of the expectation for fun fighting game play? Like, we spend on EventHubs, we spend infinite time trying to like hammer down the details of what exactly is it that makes it that, right? Because maybe fun is winning, like, right? And sometimes cheaply people can go to, well, if I want my people my consumers to have fun, I'm just going to overpower a character, and then like, well, they're enjoying it, but like I said in the previous video, which you should check out, it's also a cheap kind of fun, you know, and it's, I think we much more find long-term enjoyment and sustained enjoyment in the mental back and forth, the active. We need you to create an atmosphere where we can have a real-time brain-to-brain problem-solving contest and see how that plays out, where it feels like it's fair enough and where it manifests to the correct degree, and it's like, good luck doing that, especially if you've got like a 45 character roster, all the matchups there. It's like, it's not an easy thing to do at all. So I do not ever envy fighting game developers and the tasks that they have in front of them, but that's what they're trying to harness here. And I do think that it's possible, especially with this, like, one of the ways you could realize that, and I think a really good starting point, and I think one of the ways, if they're doing what they've done with Luke, if that's characteristic of what's going on in Street Fighter 6, this skill-based system that you don't have to use, but it benefits you to use it. You can explore the game sufficiently, I won't say fully, but sufficiently with just the basics, and the basics are easy to do and they're apparent. But if you want to spend the time to get good with execution, to get good with, you know, the particulars, you can do that, and you can play in almost an entirely new game with the same character based around this more execution kind of a thing. And then also directing people's attention towards the important fundamentals like footsies, like whiff punishing, instead of just trying to throw out crush counters all the time, which is where Street Fighter V at least initially directed all of our attention. If you could direct people to, oh, there's a really good reason to learn how to whiff punish and to set myself up around doing that and playing footsies in a way that's going to be long-term sustainable, that's what you want to do. And I do think Luke, as he is designed, sets that up. It's just that he's kind of the only one that plays in his way, and so I think he's dominating now. So, but again, once we get into an atmosphere where other characters have that, and Luke is just one flavor of that, I think that can be really interesting. And I like that. You know, you throw stuff at the dartboard at a certain level, but I'm really excited to see that explored further. I think it's got a lot of potential.
There you go. And at number 5, final one. John, this might come as a crazy thing, and especially for people who initially bought Street Fighter V, but I actually am expecting a renewed focus on quality. So a few years after Street Fighter V came out, maybe the worst fighting game launch for a AAA game we've ever seen, Capcom actually told their investors that there would be a renewed focus on quality that leads to higher review scores and not worrying about the initial game sales as much. And to back this up a bit, even their investor relations page that actually really targets the lifetime sales of their products versus how well something did initially, right? That's the information they're putting up there as a company. And I definitely don't expect Street Fighter 6 to be the best thing Capcom has ever done from a fighting game on day one, right? That's we just talked about all the problems the game is probably going to be facing. Then it's going to take a little bit for it to get into like this great shape, but I do expect it to be a complete product from day one, and I think the community would go crazy if the game shipped in as poor condition as most of their last fighting game releases have been, especially with statements they've made in recent times. They are literally saying, hey, we've messed up these initial launches. We want high review scores. We want this stuff. And I'm actually taking Capcom at their word here that they're going to deliver on it because they have delivered on it with their other games. Their other games have come out with a high level of polish and a complete product. We have not seen a complete product from Capcom launch as a fighting game since 2009 when Street Fighter 4 launched. That is the last time we saw a complete good fighting game from the get-go. And I am actually expecting that renewed focus of quality to deliver a complete product for Street Fighter 6 from the get-go. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, first off, I do think that Street Fighter V was one of the absolute worst releases of AAA modern times, but maybe MVCI, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, might beat that out. Not sure. Maybe just to acknowledge people that think so. Hey, comment and let us know which one you think is worse. I've had a lot of trepidation about saying this, but Capcom does seem to be actively learning and making correct adjustments. You see that through V-Shift. You see that through the summer or the seasonal updates. Their communication has leveled up with their community, and that was one of our biggest points of frustration early on. They have fixed that in some very significant ways. That shows that they have been listening and that they have changed things around. They're not stuck in the old ways and never going to change. They've shown that in a handful of ways. Now, I've expected that to happen earlier on, and it didn't, so that kind of got me this, my opinion of Capcom previously has been like, yeah, they're just not going to do it, and that's going to be a problem for a long time. They're just going to do things the old way, and it's not progressing into modern times, but they have shown the propensity to do that to the extent that they will. I think that they're willing to do that, so that box will be checked, but they're also probably trying some new stuff, and who knows how the new stuff will do once it's out in the wild. Right. So I think that more so the potential for issues will come from their new attempts, and that's fine, because you're out there doing new stuff, and maybe you find something that revolutionizes fighting games. They've done it before a couple times, so there's a risk there, but I think it's worth the risk. And but the worst case scenario would for them to just repeat problems of the past. I don't think there's any patience for that right now. Yeah. We shouldn't have patience for that right now. They've had more than enough time, and they've taken their lashings. They've had the failing of of Infinite and other kind of games at various capacities. They're going to adjust. They're Capcom. They haven't gone away for a reason. So I think that they will evolve. They will change here. But the big question is what will happen with the new things that they're doing.
Yep. So you heard it here. John Velociraptor Guerrero says Capcom's going to nail everything perfectly. And if there's any issues with Street Fighter 6, you can hit him up on Twitter right here.
That's what I said.
Yep.